Hey TV fans, Board now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 Episode 2. The episode is called Ad Astra per Aspera. So full spoilers from the start of this review as always, and after being a little bit mixed on the opening episode of this new season, I've got to say this one was a lot better. This was a really compelling, gripping, thrilling episode throughout. This episode really sums up at its core many of the great things about Star Trek as a series, Trek as a universe, and the whole concept behind Trek. It was a really great hour of TV and one of the standout episodes of modern Trek, I would say. Very high praise for this one, as I thought it does switch focus and focus on Pike and his mission to save Una and get her off the court-martial, her being arrested for the Federation finding out that she is in fact an Aryan and you know, had gender modifications, and that apparently is illegal under Star Trek law, Starfleet law, and it's illegal partly because she didn't disclose it as well. So, been living a lie. She was arrested, and like the other side, the Starfleet Council were willing to give her a plea deal, which she was going to take, but then she realises then her council is under the thumb, is like, you know, is in bed with like Starfleet Council, so he's just going to go along with whatever's said. So she's looking for a new council, or Pike is, and at the start of the episode we see him in this weird looking face mask struggling to breathe, and it's because he's gone to like the Ararian planet and he's gone to get what he believes is the best human rights lawyer to represent Una, and it is this new character of Nero, I think, who first time I've seen this character, I don't remember her popping up in season 1, but he's here to get her on side, to get her to like represent Una. And this is a great scene in itself. It's a great introduction to this new character who's really impressive from the start. She just has a great presence, a great sort of energy to the way she delivers her lines, and it's just a fascinating character to watch. At times she can be like, yeah, like there's elements to the character which can be a bit preachy, and you kind of feel then she's not always being that sort of like balance, but she's just a fascinating character to watch and very engaging to watch, and the actress is so good. And there's a little bit of lightness to this opening scene, because the reason Pike is wearing the mask is because the atmosphere is different on this planet, and you can only survive if you're part of the race, so he's got this mask on. And yeah, it's almost like this battle of wits where he's waiting for her to see him, and she's kind of calling his bluff, and eventually like she does this thing where you know, the air in the office or something allows him to breathe without the mask. But that's just a light little touch, and there's a couple of nice light touches in this. But what's so great about this episode, and it focusing on like this whole case and all the different aspects, all the different politics and laws going on, is everything that's paid off later on in the episode is built to, and everything there's a setup for. Like there's a certain thing that's mentioned earlier in the episode that plants a seed, and that is later returned to in the episode. It's really satisfying to watch. It's a really tightly put together episode, and it's also one of those that uses all the characters very nicely. Like they all have quite a key part to play, like in most cases, I would say. But I like how Pike persuades this Nero to represent Una, because she's not going to do it at first because she's got this grudge against her, and it's to do with their pasts. It's partly to do with her joining the Federation, which Nera has a problem with, and it's also, as it's revealed later on when she's on the witness stand, that being Una, then because she made a decision to defect to the non-Aryan side planet, essentially, because she gives this history lesson of how the two races were divided on two planets, and her family chose to go to the non-Aryan side, and that was because they could pass as like non-Aryans. So there's all this personal history, because Nara has a big human rights offensive when it comes to like her race, and it's very anti-Starfleet. So Pike has to talk her into this. He starts saying things like, so far you've not been very successful with your other cases, but this case you can use as a figurehead to really put a spotlight on those other cases. And this is a smart bit of writing in itself, because she does use that later in the episode, or it's at least implied that she doesn't necessarily want to represent Una, but she is doing it for that exact reason. Like, Una herself brings it up, and you're sort of using this as a soapbox and a way to get at the Federation. You don't really care about my case or like the details of it. So that is something that's played into later. You also have this character of like the other side, well, one of the co-counsels, who we see is a little bit friendly with Pike. Like, they seem to know each other quite well. A little bit of a flirtation with those two, but like, she's quite a savvy one, and definitely one of those characters that's a bit on the murky side. There's moments where she comes across as quite level-headed and fair, and then there's other moments where she's a little bit on the sneaky side. So there's a scene where she's like has a drink or is having dinner with Pike, and that first seems to be like really friendly towards him, but it turns out she's trying to grill him secretly. Like, she's trying to find out how long he knew about Una and what she was, and that again is another nice little setup, because that comes into play and is used against Una and Pike later in the episode. But she says to Pike in a previous scene, then, I'm just abiding by the law, I'm just doing my job here. And that's another like smart detail, because this puts it in your mind then the law and the different elements of it, and how it can be interpreted, and just different aspects, like and I don't know, just like the values of it, and the scrutiny it's going to be put over on in later in the episode. So her mentioning it this early then sets it up for the rest of the episode, how it's going to play a part when they get to this trial, because they go forward and like at what they go from offering Una a deal to essentially going for full punishment, like disbarring her and giving her a 20-year sentence if she's found guilty, like, which obviously the rest of them think is extreme. But the trial starts, and it's classic Star Trek, a classic like diplomatic trial with lots of different characters and lots of energy to it, but some great pacing throughout. And yeah, it's just very engrossing and very edge of your seat. And I think what's great about the writing of it is then by the end of the episode, when Una finally gets off, you believe in it. Like, they've made you believe that the case has been made in a very strong and compelling way, and that this human rights lawyer like Nero is very smart, is very savvy, and has found a loophole in the law and has found a convincing argument. But it also gets to like encompass those classic Trek elements, those like kind of preachy but also very like open speeches, and very like emotionally engaging speeches that just sell you on these characters and their beliefs and like the world of Star Trek. And the court is like a great like place for this, but it's a cornerstone of the show. That stuff is what ultimately wins out in the case. But there's like lots of back and forth, because at one point they bring forward like an Admiral April, and this is an important part of the case, because like when he's being questioned by the other side, he talks well of Una, says like she's one of the most impressive like chiefs I've ever interviewed, and he says like he gave her the job because he was impressed with her and saw the potential, but then it's kind of forced to admit that if he knew about her background and the gender modifications, then he wouldn't have hired her. And he claims that then he would, because of the law, he would have no choice but to deny her being hired. And this is when Neko really goes full blown and goes after him, because she starts pointing out all these different things that he's done which have been exemptions from what he's just said he did in the case. So he's made exemptions in other cases, which kind of show him up to be a little bit of a hypocrite. But her whole argument is that the laws are there to be interpreted, and you have to do it on a case-by-case basis. Like, different cases are unique to one another. You can't just go with the same ruling every time, which there's definitely a strong argument for in the real world as well as in Star Trek, and she makes the argument very well. She has some really like compelling dialogue in the episode, like where she's talking about like a law, like be not something being a law, it doesn't make it kind of a value sort of thing. It doesn't make it just, is the expression she uses, and she talks about laws having values, and like she really goes after April and kind of does plant some like blows, but for a while, like, because the rest of the crew are watching on the monitors, and everyone in the court is a bit perplexed, because for a while they don't really see the strategy here. And that's when Una has a bit of a chip at her afterwards, because she accuses her of being on a soapbox, and she's not happy with the way she's treated like the Admiral, even though she definitely makes some fair points. But the judge is trying to like slap her down and says he's not on trial here. And in the next scene, it's when you get like the different crew members speaking on Una's part. And there's once again a nice little bit of humour with Spock, because there's a couple of funny scenes with him in the episode. There's a scene back on the ship where like it's the Doctor and one of the other ship members who are watching him in this meeting with like someone who knew his father, and she's sort of mocking him, like doing this impression of him, and like he comes over and apologizes for being like so angry, and that even though he wasn't, it was like the classic sort of Spock way of speaking to someone. So that's a nice little lighter moment. And then when they're all being questioned by the opposition, and like Spock says, yeah, I did notice something unusual about her, and it's like, well, what was it? And says, well, she had an affection for Gilbert and Sullivan musicals, and then they all smile. But Scene also has a big role in this episode, because she comes to Neko earlier and wants to help, and there's a special sort of link between her and Una, because Una has helped her get on into Starfleet, and there's also like a thematic link because of her being of a different race and now being accepted into Starfleet, a bit like Una's path as well. So she feels a special connection and is motivated to help her in any way she can, and she wants to try and find out who blew the whistle on her, who like alerted Starfleet to her. So at one point she talks to Uhura, like says, "Can you help me?" And she says, "No, sorry, you've got to find a different way." And Singh does have quite a big role in the episode, because there's a scene later on where she talks to Necro, where she thinks that she might be the one who alerted them, and it's because when she first found out about Una and her lying and her past, and she was kind of mad with her in the moment, so she recorded like a personal log, and she's worried that maybe that got out to the Federation, and that's how Una was arrested. But Necro points out that it couldn't have been, because that was too recent. Like, normally they don't like check them. They check them every 6 months, she says, so it couldn't have been that personal log that they used. And there's a nice little bit of suspense at the end of the scene, because like the lawyer seems to have figured out who it was, and you can tell by the way she's talking then she's figured it out, but they don't reveal it in the scene. They save it to the next like big scene in court, which is like really well executed, great writing once again. But yeah, Singh plays a big part in the episode. Like, she really speaks up for Una in court, because she says, like, not only do I owe her my job here, my role, but I also owe her my life. So it's a really glowing, like, sort of character witness at the end of the day. But what it comes down to is when they're going into final arguments, and like Necro has really like made her argument very strong about how like laws are meant to be interpreted, and how there are examples of the federations or officials there like breaking the rules when it suited them on certain missions, because she starts to make a case for like sort of like immigrants being taken in, like seeking asylum, because Una, in maybe the standout scene of the episode, tells her about the past and a very personal history, and the plight she went through as a youngster, and the plight her family went through, and she paints a very like draconian picture, almost like of a Nazi state, with the way like her family was treated because of what they were, and about how it led to like this extremist sort of groups who would like bully them, and how she got caught up in a scuffle. And well, like for example, a 10-year-old was like arrested just because of who he was, but also she got caught up in an incident where she broke her leg, which we see a bit of it at the start of the episode. And once again, because of the discrimination of the state and the Federation, she has to seek like an Aryan doctor, which are in short supply because they're under like Federation rule. So she had to seek a special doctor, otherwise she would have died from the infection. And that's when she tells the story about how like there was a divide between non-Aryans and like Aryans, and her family ultimately chose the other planet because they could pass as non-Aryans. And so it paints a rich picture of the history. But that's when she quotes the title of the episode, because it's to do with finding salvation in space, and how she ultimately, despite the flaws in Starfleet, she still believes in them. She still believes that they can achieve, you know, like kind of, I don't know how to sum it up, but they can just achieve, you know, like a coming together of races and no discrimination and like the best of humanity, all the rest of it. But it's a really compelling like character moment, because of her belief for Starfleet, despite all the flaws they've said. And it's this idea of the promise is there for the future, even if it's very far from perfect now. And it's a very potent argument to be made to the court that despite all the things she's been put through, she still believes in the system. She still believes in the change which can be made. And that's when there's a flip and a turn which almost flips it around against them again. Well, it does flip it around against them, and that's when they go after Pike as well, because you've got the other council, the co-council, the one who's definitely more the villain of the piece, where he gets Una to confess how long Pike knew about her history, her past, and it turns out it's 4 months, which is obviously plenty of time and before the arrest. So he wants to bring forward a charge against not only Una but Pike over a conspiracy to conceal this information. But ultimately, in her last brilliant act, Necra finds a loophole in the law and finds that what ultimately happened is that Una was seeking asylum with Pike and with the Federation, and it turns out that is something that's written into law. Then if such a person fears for her life, her or his life from the homeland, and is fleeing, then they can seek asylum with the Federation. So it turns out then by the letter of the law and also by the interpretation of the law, Pike was using that interpretation to take Una in. And this is where the stuff from earlier comes into play with the Admiral April, because the lawyer, Naka, points out that in other cases when he went to different planets, he used such judgment, even though technically it would have been against Federation law, but he used his own interpretation of those laws. So she's kind of saying if it's all right for him to do it, then it's all right for Pike to do it. And Pike was obeying those laws and the law of taking in an asylum seeker if that person is fleeing from mortal danger. And there's lots of powerful imagery and thoughts conjured up in this episode, because at one point the lawyer is talking about apartheid, and there's a lot of mention to do with sort of dictator style states, and some of it could have been heavy-handed if the writing wasn't so good and the performances wasn't so good and just everything played out really successfully, and because of that it never really felt preachy, or it never felt over the top. It was just the right level all the way through. And ultimately, of course, the court rules in favour of Una, because it says then, sure, the laws are there for a reason, and it's to stop some of the disasters we've had in the past, but then each individual case has to be judged on its merits, and it can't just be one rule all the time. And so ultimately the court is convinced then Una's case is a fair one, and she should be exempt and let off. And it's just a beautiful moment. It's a great feel-good moment where she's finally released, and her making amends with Naka as well, and actually holding hands there in the court, and Naka making it clear she doesn't like the Starfleet, she doesn't like the Federation, but she says this is a start, and that's when it comes to an Aryan being chief. And she's a great character. I was really impressed with this new character, and I hope to see more of her. I would like to see her appear in other episodes, but just the joy of everybody when Una comes back and is released, it really lands. It's a wonderful episode and a very worthy Star Trek episode of TV. So that's Strange New Worlds. for the week. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. Share me out on social media. You can ding the bell on YouTube, and you can also support the channel either at PayPal, so that's a link is on the channel, that's a one-off donation, or you can support me monthly for as little as $1 a month on patreon.com/boardnow for some extras and also some early access to reviews. But thanks for listening. I'll see you guys again soon.